Balance of Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. Tonight, healthcare proposal on hold. The White House facing new questions about plans to extend ACA premiums before prices skyrocket for millions of Americans. New reports tonight the administration may be pumping the brakes. Also, book it. President Trump quickly RSVPs to President Xi's offer for a springtime visit to Beijing. The two leaders talking for more than an hour today, discussing everything from trade to Taiwan. And what comes next for Ukraine and the U.S. drafted peace plan? We'll speak ahead with former NATO Ambassador Ivo Daalder in just a few moments. Plus, case dismissed. A federal judge throwing out the charges against two of President Trump's biggest perceived enemies, James Comey and Letitia James. But are they in the clear? How the DOJ might respond, our legal expert is standing by. And the Pentagon now announcing it's investigating Arizona Senator Mark Kelly over his role in a video telling military personnel to disobey orders if they conflict with the law. The grounds the Pentagon says it has to investigate and more when we speak with Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Coming up. But we begin this evening with news from Washington and that phone call between President Trump and Chinese President Xi, with the president now taking to his social media post to tell the world that he will be visiting China this spring, writing, quote, President Xi invited me to Beijing in April, which I accepted, and I reciprocated, where he will be my guest for a state visit in the U.S. later in the year. He writes, we agreed that it's important we communicate often, which I look forward to doing. That post coming after we learned the two presidents discussed everything from trade to Taiwan on that call, one in which Trump says was a, quote, very good telephone call. Joining us now with much more on this, Bloomberg's Kate Sullivan, who is live on the North Lawn of the White House. Kate, what brought this call to pass today? We've heard a drumbeat for days leading up to their prior meetings until now.
Absolutely. So this was their first phone call since that tariff truce last month. You know, the two leaders met just a few weeks ago in person in South Korea, agreed to a year-long truce, and we really saw the rolling back of many of the tariffs that Trump had imposed on China. So today's call seemed to be really an attempt to build on some of that positive momentum that came out of that in-person meeting. You know, as you mentioned, Trump said that he would be going to China in April of next year and that he had invited Xi to the White House for a state visit later in the year as well. Trump, you know, and Xi spoke about a number of issues: trade, Russia's war in Ukraine, purchases of soybeans and other farm products. But Caroline Leavitt was actually just out here speaking to reporters and said really the main focus of the phone call was to talk about this trade deal that the U.S. and China are trying to hammer out and really trying to move the ball forward there.
Kate, 6 weeks to go until Obamacare subsidies expire, and there was an expectation that the president could, as soon as today, unveil a new proposal to alleviate the deadline and, in fact, put in place a 2-year extension with some limitations on eligibility. Now, word from the White House is, at least reportedly, that plan is postponed. What can you tell us?
So really at the heart of this, the White House is trying to get ahead of a surge in health insurance premiums that's going to be caused by these subsidies, as you mentioned, expiring at the end of this year. You know, there really is added pressure on the White House right now to address these rising costs, to bring these costs down, because there's been really a renewed focus on affordability and rising costs. This was a winning message for Democrats recently on Election Day. This is something that the White House knows that they need to really recalibrate their message on. We've heard the president really speak a lot more about affordability recently. Caroline Leavitt was actually just asked, you know, in terms of what this plan is going to look like, Caroline Leavitt was just speaking to reporters. Let's listen to what she had to say.
Healthcare is a topic of discussion that's happening very frequently and robustly inside the West Wing right now. The president's very much involved in these talks, and he's very focused on unveiling a healthcare proposal that will fix the system and will bring down costs for consumers. As for the details of those discussions, I'll let the president speak for himself.
So not a lot of details there, concrete details on what this plan is going to look like. What we do know is that the president has said that he's hoping to secure a solution by January 30th. And we, of course, heard Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that we could see a proposal as early as this week. So we're just waiting to see if that actually happens and if we see an actual proposal by the end of this week.
Be a big deal, Kate. Thank you. Bloomberg's Kate Sullivan reporting live from the White House. Always a pleasure to have you with us. Meantime, the Trump administration is renewing its pressure campaign against Ukrainian President Zelensky to come to a peace agreement with Russia to end the war. U.S. and Russian officials, as we've told you, have been working in tandem to create a peace agreement. But that plan would force Ukraine to cede land, reduce its military, and forbid it from joining NATO, with Ukraine and its European allies seeking to correct course now with discussions on territorial swaps and a security agreement. German Chancellor Merz telling reporters today there cannot be a Ukraine peace plan without European backing. Now, importantly, Ukrainian and U.S. officials, including the Secretary of State Marco Rubio, worked over details of a peace blueprint over the weekend, narrowing it down to a new list of 19 proposals, with discussions to continue, they say, in the coming days. And joining us now with his perspective and the way forward, Ivo Daalder, former U.S. ambassador to NATO under the Obama administration. He's also a senior fellow at Harvard's Belfer Center. Mr. Ambassador, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. It seems the president's got a couple of people on his team advising him. The aforementioned Secretary of State, who may not always be on the same page with Steve Witkoff or with his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Can they create a plan that's acceptable to Kyiv?
Well, we'll have to see, because so far, of course, the differences within the administration are one of the reasons people are increasingly confused about what it is that the president is proposing. Most astonishing, on Saturday, we heard from a number of senators who had just been briefed by Secretary of State Marco Rubio that the plan that had been leaked and everybody was talking about was really a Russian plan, which is frankly how it read. But at the same time, an hour later, he tweeted, oh, no, it's a U.S. plan. So the problem is the plan is whether it's U.S. or Russian or whatever it is, it's not going to work. Here is an attempt by the United States and Russia to come up with some kind of deal that they can force Ukraine to sign on to. It's time that the United States finally talks to the Ukrainians. That's what happened yesterday. And we'll see what came out of that. As it stands, those 28 points that Steve Witkoff worked together with his Russian counterpart aren't going to really end this war, and they're not going to be acceptable to Ukraine or indeed to the Europeans, who have to do a whole bunch of things according to these points, but also we're not consulted.
Secretary Rubio calling this a living, breathing document. Every day with input, it changes, he says, and was speaking quite optimistically before he left Geneva. Listen to the Secretary of State.
It is probably the most productive day we have had on this issue, maybe in the entirety of our engagement, but certainly in a very long time. But work remains, and because this continues to be a working process, you know, I don't want to declare victory or finality.
He also moved back, essentially, or kind of watered down the idea of a Thanksgiving deadline, Ambassador. I know the president likes to think in terms of these big events. Remember the idea of reopening after COVID on Easter Sunday. Should we look beyond the holiday this week for the answer here?
Yeah, there's not going to be a deal that the Ukrainians are sign off on, let alone a deal that the Ukrainians and the Russians are going to be signing off on by Thursday or by Christmas. This conflict has been going on for over 11 years. The idea that it's going to be settled because a bunch of guys come up with 28 points is just not how it happens. What Secretary Rubio did finally is sit down, have a serious negotiation. This takes time. It takes effort. It takes understanding. It takes a willingness to stand in other people's shoes. And ultimately, it takes the two parties to the conflict, which is not the United States, but Ukraine and Russia, to sit down across the table and start working out their differences. The U.S. can mediate, but the U.S. can't dictate.
I want to ask you about something the Prime Minister of Poland put on Twitter here, and it gets back to your earlier remarks about the sourcing of this 28-point plan before it started to be revised over the weekend. This was said to be done with the U.S. and Russia as a primary drafter Donald Tusk said he and other leaders are ready to negotiate on the plan. Quote, however, before we start our work, he writes, it would be good to know for sure who is the author of the plan and where it was created, unquote. How complex is this for our European allies to get their heads around, not knowing the answer?
You know, it's exactly the problem here. There is no policy process in the United States. We don't have people sitting around the room in the situation room, deputies and then principals to work out the differences within the administration in order to find what the U.S. position is. Instead, what we have is a bunch of folks who are just operating by themselves. This plan apparently came out of discussions that Steve Witkoff had with his Russian counterpart, Kirill Dmitriev, back in October. It was perhaps refined with input from Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of the president, who, by the way, doesn't have any official standing in this administration, and came to Washington without really any input from either the Secretary of State or anyone else. And that's the problem, because if you have a process that no one understands, then it's very difficult to react to it. And I think what Prime Minister Tusk said there is, we'd like to know who the author is before we decide that that's the starting point. Because if the author is Moscow, the Europeans are not going to take it as a starting point.
Ambassador, the administration is dealing with this matter as it also prepares to potentially start a war in our own hemisphere here. And I'm just noting the fact that the nation's top military officer today is on his way to the Caribbean, touching down in Puerto Rico. That's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, Raisin Kane, as President Trump likes to call him. Part of his mission is to say thank you to the troops. We have 15,000 military personnel now gathered in the region to say thank you for being in harm's way on Thanksgiving. I'm sure that's not all he's up to there. Does this visit tell you that we're getting closer to military action?
Well, it certainly looks that way. I mean, the accumulation of military power in the Caribbean today is as large as it was at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, or in fact, the Cuban Missile Crisis was larger. But since that time, we haven't had this accumulation of power in the Caribbean. We have the largest aircraft carrier, which is very rare to have any aircraft carrier in the Caribbean. We have cruisers and destroyers, large numbers of Marines. It sure looks like this is a little bit more than intercepting drug boats, but a potential beginning of a military action. On the other hand, the president doesn't like military action that involves the possibility of casualties of American troops. And so this may just turn out to be a bluff. The problem is, if it's a bluff, what happens if Maduro calls it?
You were ambassador to NATO. What do our NATO allies think about this in terms of intel sharing or their lack of knowledge about what's happening in the region?
So they're worried. Part of it, they're worried because, of course, the Gerald Ford aircraft carrier was pulled out of the Mediterranean, was there for exercises and a presence that was important for NATO. And they're also worried that this is illegal, that this is an action by the United States to invade another country at the very time that we're trying to stand up to Russia for doing exactly the same thing. They're so unhappy with it that the UK, the British government, has now said that it will not share intelligence with the United States to assist in any way with operations against Venezuela. That's unheard of. That's extraordinary. It comes after the Dutch government has decided that it is limiting its intelligence sharing with the United States for fear that is being politicized. We are in uncharted waters when it comes to the relationship with the United States and our allies. If America first means that we have to lose our allies in the process, we've got a problem. We're stronger with our allies than we are having to stand by ourselves, and that's unfortunately the way we're heading.
Great to have you back, Ambassador. Ivo Daalder, former U.S. ambassador to NATO. We thank you. It was another day to watch on Wall Street as the S&P 500 posted its best day in 6 weeks, opening the week with a 1.5% jump. The NASDAQ closed today up more than 2.5%. For all the details on today's market moves, we turn to Power Moves with Bloomberg's Katie Greifeld, who is at World Headquarters in New York. Katie, that spasm of selling we saw last Thursday is a distant memory now, huh?
Yeah, well, it's an open question whether or not we're going to see more of that. But at least for today, the story was green arrows, as you can see behind me. As you mentioned, Joe, the S&P 500 higher by about 1.6% if you round up. A lot of that was driven by big tech. You can see the NASDAQ 100 higher by about 2.6%. The S&P 500, for context, was down about 2% last week, so certainly quite a reversal there. It even extended to Bitcoin, which is interesting. We know that Bitcoin has been mired in a bear market of its own, but it managed to catch a bid today. It's still below $90,000 a coin, but managing to rise just a little bit on this Monday. I do want to talk about the bond market a little bit, because this could help explain why we saw a bit of a reversal. You saw a rally come in, especially when it comes to the long end as you go out the curve. We did hear from Fed Governor Chris Waller saying that he's advocating for an interest rate cut next month. That is one of the biggest questions on Wall Street, what we're going to see the Fed actually deliver in December. And we had another vote here basically saying we should cut rates. We'll see what actually happens there. But in terms of the single stock action, I do want to talk a little bit about Novo Nordisk. If you take a look at ADRs of Novo Nordisk, down sharply in today's session. That's after two trials showed that a pill version of Ozempic failed to slow the progression of Alzheimer's disease in that pair of studies. This has been one of the big hopes for a catalyst for this stock. We know that Novo has sort of switched places with Eli Lilly when it comes to who has the upper hand in the U.S. GLP-1 drug market. So a lot of disappointment there. But in terms of why you saw such a big rally across the indexes, let's talk a little bit about Alphabet here. The news last week was that Gemini 3 hit the scene, and to a lot of people, it's leapfrogging past ChatGPT and some of the other rivals as well. You actually heard from Mark Benioff, he's the CEO of Salesforce, over the weekend, saying that he's never going back. He's sticking with Gemini 3. You saw an enormous rally in Alphabet shares, actually closing at an all-time high. So that explains some of the enthusiasm in the market. But again, Joe, we'll see if it lasts, because we know it's a holiday-shortened week and liquidity is light right now.
Really something. The Benioff bump, I guess, is a thing. Bloomberg's Katie Greifeld. Thank you so much, Katie. It's great to see you. Coming up, a federal judge throws out criminal charges against former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James. We check both boxes ahead and discuss the implications with former Watergate prosecutor Nick Akerman. It's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
And about a justice system which has been weaponized. A justice system which has been used as a tool of revenge and a weapon against those individuals who simply did their job and who stood up for the rule of law.
This is Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. That was an impassioned New York Attorney General Letitia James exactly 1 month ago today, after appearing before court pleading not guilty to charges put forward by the Trump administration. Fast forward to today. This headline says it all. Quote, judge dismisses Comey, James indictments after finding that prosecutor was illegally appointed. The Associated Press first reporting the news as indeed charges against James and former FBI Director James Comey dropped today. So where do we go next? Joining us, former Watergate prosecutor Nick Akerman. It's great to see you. Mr. Akerman, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. We should note that these charges were dropped without prejudice, suggesting that they could be filed again or somehow this indictment could be reassembled. What do you see next in this case?
Well, obviously, the Department of Justice can appeal both of these decisions. And it certainly either whether it's with prejudice or without prejudice, if it's overturned, then obviously the indictment goes forward with Halligan as the U.S. attorney. But I don't think that really makes much of a difference. I think that I've read both of the opinions. They're both pretty much the same. I think it's pretty clear that she should have never been appointed, that AG Bondi had no business appointing a second interim U.S. attorney, that the job was then up to the court and the judges in the Eastern District of Virginia to appoint a new U.S. attorney, And that's what's going to happen here. And when they appoint somebody, they're going to get somebody who's well qualified. They're not going to be like Halligan, who doesn't know the first thing about criminal law, criminal prosecution, and they're going to get someone competent. And we know what happened the last time when they had competent people in charge of both of these prosecutions. They decided that there wasn't a case. So I think at the end of the day,
we've been talking about Lindsay Halligan since September, and credit where it's due. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to play you for everyone here. This is the 26th of September, and your reaction to this indictment being filed. Let's go back in time and listen.
I think the case will get thrown out at some point. The only person who even signed off on that indictment is Lindsay Halligan, who has never appeared before a grand jury in her life. She's an insurance lawyer. I mean, she should know about risk, because the risk to her here is enormous. She could wind up in the same position as Rudy Giuliani in the prosecutor's hall of shame and be basically her license lifted and be disbarred. I mean, there's real risk to lawyers who take on this case.
Wow, I'm pretty sure you haven't changed your opinion on this. So congrats, number one, for being right. This is because of what they say was the illegal appointment or the inappropriate appointment of Lindsay Halligan. Nick Akerman, is her legal career over?
I think she's got some real problems here. I'm not sure if it's quite over yet, but I know there's at least one complaint that's been made with the Virginia bar, the Florida bar, and I think there's going to be others. As this develops, we're going to learn more, because she wound up giving a charge to the grand jury that wasn't correct in the law. She basically questioned Comey's right to remain silent and basically told him they'd have to he'd be able to testify before the trial jury when this went to trial, and that there would be better evidence than the government had that they were presenting to the grand jury, both of which are totally, totally wrong. So she's got real problems. But keep in mind that the overriding theme of both of these cases is vindictive prosecution. So if you take that as a starting point, everything else that's being done here, whether it's appointing somebody who is a complete idiot that knows nothing about the law and is put in there just as a tool to get this indictment, or whether they're giving improper instructions to the grand jury, or whether they're actually making up these indictments. The indictment against Comey essentially is contrary to established Supreme Court law on false statements and perjury. The statement that they quote in there, there's no question, there's no answer that's given that they claim is perjurious or false. The questions are literally true, the answers are literally true that Comey gives. So there's really no case here, either with him or with James, where they essentially pick and choose what they want out of the mortgage document. They try and say she couldn't rent it when the document says she could rent it, and they say she had to live there when the document just says she has to be around to be able to live there. So the whole case has got real problems right from the get-go.
Well, it sure sounds like it, based on your analysis. It was September 20th that President Trump posted that note to Pam in which he talked about going after Comey, Adam Shifty Schiff, and Letitia, as he put it. We've only got 10 seconds, Nick Akerman. Does Adam Schiff sleep easier tonight?
I would think so. I don't think there's a case there. I think they're having problems trying to figure out what they can even make as a case. So, yeah, I think what they're looking to do is the Eastern District of New York, they're going to wind up getting a real prosecutor there at some point.
Nick Akerman, great to have you back. Former Assistant U.S. Attorney, former Watergate prosecutor. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is Bloomberg.
Do you want to sell China some chips and keep them using our tech and our tech stack? Or do you say to them, look, we're not going to sell you our best chips. We're just going to hold off on that, and we're going to compete in the AI race ourselves. So that is the question. It's in front of the president. He's going to decide. It's a really, really interesting question. He's got all the information. He's got lots and lots of experts talking to him, and he's going to decide which way he wants to go forward.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. The Commerce Secretary there, Howard Lutnick, this morning on Bloomberg surveillance, sharing indeed that President Trump is facing the existential question here, whether or not to allow NVIDIA to sell advanced chips to China. The sale of these chips has become a major focus point when it comes to national security concerns and economic expansion in the U.S. as the president navigates these trade negotiations with China's Xi. And of course, they spoke just as recently as this morning. Here to break it all down for us in our Washington bureau is Bloomberg's Michael Shepard. Shep, it's always great to have you. I see NVIDIA stock up a bit today, 2%. Most of the AI space was higher after a lot of concerns last week. And when it comes to NVIDIA, one of the potential sweeteners here, again, is doing business in China. Most recently reports that the H200 chips could be under consideration inside the White House. What do you know about it?
They appear to be back on the table. There has been some discussion inside the White House per our exclusive last week about whether to allow sales of NVIDIA's H200 chips. Now, keep in mind, Joe, that this is a generation less than the Blackwells that we have been talking about a few weeks back when the president was about to meet with Xi Jinping and floating the idea that he might allow a version of the cutting-edge Blackwell design chip to be sold. Now, what we're talking about here is from the Hopper class of chips. And it's still quite good, though. And whether the H200 would clear the bar with U.S. officials is a contentious issue. And the reason is there is concern here in Washington among those China hawks whom we've talked to over the years that allowing China to have any sort of access to advanced technologies such as this poses a national security risk to the U.S., namely that China's military and intelligence establishment could use the technology either to copy it or to deploy it in some fashion against the U.S. Now, on the flip side, though, you see in the administration, and this is certainly an argument that NVIDIA Chief Executive Officer Jensen Huang has made repeatedly, that, look, if you want to win the AI race with China, you can't just compete in other markets. You have to compete in the Chinese market, too. And you do that by selling some of these chips. So this will be a tough choice for the president to make. And the one thing is we both know is that Jensen Huang has really developed this bond with Donald Trump. And we'll see how far that carries, especially as these conversations at the highest level between the president and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping continue.
The AI race among consumers appears to be led by Alphabet. Looking at this jump today in Google, we were laughing earlier calling it the Benioff bounce, but Mark Benioff of Salesforce on X saying he'll never go back to ChatGPT after the new version is of Gemini, right? It's Gemini 3 at this point. It seems to be Gemini really 3, resonating.
And Joe, this is really a signature moment here because, you know, Google is one of the pioneers when it comes to artificial intelligence over the years. And yet, in a way, the headlines have really focused so much more on Anthropic and, of course, OpenAI and ChatGPT. Yet many of the reviews, including the one that you just mentioned from Mark Benioff, whose own company, Salesforce, is trying to develop its agentic models for sale to the world, to get that kind of a ringing endorsement from him, as well as many other reviewers in the weeks since Gemini 3 was released, really signals that this could be something of a game changer. And we've seen it in Alphabet shares. They're up 12% since last week when the new version was released. And, Joe, the difference is in performance when it comes to inference and, you know, the rankings, of course, that some people really pay close attention to have seen Gemini vault to the top. But another interesting thing that our colleague Austin Carr highlighted in reviewing this for our Tech in Depth newsletter was the interface. The interface is very different. It's much more graphically inclined and much more easy to digest for a user.
Fascinating. Well, this is really interesting to see a late blooming Alphabet here when it comes to the AI race. Michael Shepard, thank you, as always, reporting for Bloomberg in Washington. The White House did expect to unveil, as we told you earlier, a health care framework that would include a 2-year Obamacare extension, at least to subsidies, as soon as this week. Today, though, we learned through reports the administration has decided to postpone the plan, with multiple outlets now reporting the White House's decision. Still less than 5 weeks now in the year before health care subsidies are expected to rise for millions of Americans. This is, of course, why the government shut down, and there is no solution at hand. Joining us now with her perspective on this, No stranger to this debate. Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz of Florida, who remembers all too well 15 years ago when Obamacare was debated and first passed. Congresswoman, it's good to see you. Welcome back. There was a promise in the Senate for a floor vote. John Thune made that clear to Democratic senators who then agreed to reopen the government. You have no such promise on the House side. And with no real plan to vote on, Congresswoman, are we going to go through this all over again at the end of January?
You know, this harkens back to Donald Trump referencing, well, I have a concept of a plan. He has never actually cared about making sure that health care is affordable. He really focuses much more on taking care of the wealthiest, most fortunate Americans. And, you know, you've got working families, middle-class folks who are staring down the barrel of a horrendous healthcare cost spike. For example, I just heard from a former colleague of my own mom's who said that she got a premium notice that tells her that her premiums on the Affordable Care Act are going to spike from $386 a month without the tax credit, enhanced tax credits, to $1,500 a month. This is a very serious healthcare cost crisis. Democrats have been committed to making sure we could extend those tax credits, keep healthcare affordable, and we're happy to work with anyone who wants to continue to improve the Affordable Care Act. But doing nothing is not an option, and that appears to be what Republicans continue to sit on.
At least according to reports, the White House was working on something around a 2-year extension of the COVID-era subsidies, Congresswoman, with new limits on eligibility, income caps for enrollees to qualify, as well as minimum premium payments. The cap would limit subsidies to individuals with income, we understand, up to 700% of the federal poverty line. If someone did put a plan like that before you, would you vote for it?
Joe, I'm a show me person, not a tell me person. And Donald Trump has been telling us about his so-called plans, whether it was infrastructure, which took Democrats to actually do something about for all the infrastructure days and weeks he had, or his concept of a plan and all the times he's told us that he's got a solution for health care. So I believe it when I see it. But what we should do is what Democrats have said this entire time: come to the table, sit down, let's negotiate. We have a bill in the form of a discharge petition that would extend the enhanced premium tax credits for 3 years, so that we could both make sure that people maintain that affordability and at the same time work together to try to really focus on a more permanent modification. That's what we need to be doing.
You're on the Appropriations Committee. I understand. Do you hold your breath for regular order or even for any sort of funding mechanism? Because we hear from Speaker Johnson, who says they're going to pass all 12 spending bills. Chuck Fleischmann was just on the air, the Republican from Tennessee, today, saying that's his focus as an appropriator before we even get around to health care. Are we back to regular order in the next couple of weeks?
So. I certainly hope so. I'll believe it when I see it. We've certainly passed our bills.
You're the first time in a generation.
Yeah, I haven't been in Congress when we've actually passed all 12 separate appropriations bills and sent them individually to the president. We usually end up in an omnibus or a continuing resolution like we did this year for the first time in history. Mm-hmm. We do need to do that. But we can walk and chew gum and should walk and chew gum, I guess, unless you're Mike Johnson, and then you can't. You just send your members on a taxpayer-funded vacation for 8 weeks. But we should be working together on making sure we bring the appropriations process that now the CR expires January 30th in for a landing. And at the same time, before December 31st, extend those tax credits, because right at the holidays, forcing people to choose between Trump's higher cost on everything as a result of tariffs and healthcare costs and his refusal to do anything about affordability, that is really pinching people badly. And I'm a first things first person. Let's sit down. The Senate promised to get together and bring us a proposal. I expect that Mike Johnson would take up what that is. I'd like to see it. And like I said, we've got to have a resolution to this, because we cannot force people like the 203,000 constituents that I have, whose healthcare costs will explode if those tax credits don't get extended.
Well, there is a bipartisan nature to all of this. Everyone needs health care. And I'm sure you saw the video from Marjorie Taylor Greene. It hit after we came off the air on Friday. I haven't even had a chance to talk about it yet on the program today. But she's out. She's leaving Congress. And, of course, the heart of the split between Marjorie Taylor Greene and Donald Trump was health care. She talked about the premiums that were going to be impacting her own family in her district in Georgia. I just want to play some of the video that she put up. It was lengthy. She's speaking direct to camera from her home. Let's watch and listen for the sake of her audience.
When common American people realize and understand that the political industrial complex of both parties is ripping this country apart, that not one elected leader like me is able to stop Washington's machine from gradually destroying our country, and instead the reality is that they, common Americans, the people, possess the real power over Washington, then I'll be here by their side to rebuild it. I'll be resigning from office with my last day being January 5th, 2026, and I look forward to seeing many of you again sometime in the future.
Congresswoman, I think it's been a little bit too cute for some to see Democrats rallying around someone they considered an arch enemy, but I wonder if some of her message resonates with you.
Well, it does, and it's kind of astonishes me myself, because I was the sponsor of the bill, the resolution to remove Marjorie Taylor Greene in her first term from her committees because of how appalling her conduct was. But I do have to say that she's been right about her colleagues' refusal to focus on the really skyrocketing cost of individual household items and kitchen table costs, like electric bills going up 61%, and making sure that we can get rid of the ridiculous tariff policy that has caused all these prices to increase. But I have to say that, each of us knows our own constituents the best. I don't, it's really baffling that she's deciding to resign. I mean, if it were me, I would be staying and fighting. I wouldn't let a president of the United States bully me out of my job. Your constituents know you best, and you should stand up for them and stay in the fight rather than, ducking and covering, cutting and running. I don't know. I just think it's an odd decision that I certainly wouldn't make if I were her.
I'm curious to see what she does next. Congresswoman, thank you. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the Democrat from Florida, with us on Bloomberg. It's always a pleasure. Coming up, now that a federal judge has tossed out the charges, as we told you, against former FBI Director James Comey, as well as New York Attorney General Letitia James, how will the DOJ respond? We'll talk about what's next when we assemble our political panel next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. We'll assemble our political panel in just a moment. First, the stories we're watching in today's Power Brief. The Associated Press defending its First Amendment freedoms today as a judge heard arguments in its case against the Trump administration. The case focusing on the administration's actions to limit the AP's access to the White House after the news agency elected not to refer to the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. In a statement, the AP executive editor said, quote, if a president of any party can use personal and political preference to choose which journalists to allow in and kick others out because of the words they use, it means you are not getting a full picture of what's happening, unquote. We're learning that Trump's Department of Government Efficiency, the DOGE, has quietly disbanded with 8 months left on its mandate. The Office of Personnel Management now saying the agency, once touted as Trump's tool to slash bureaucracy, is no longer a centralized entity. Former employees of the cost-cutting unit spearheaded by Elon Musk have dispersed, taking on new roles in the administration, while reports state a government-wide hiring freeze has too ended. There was a DOGE reunion over the weekend in Austin. Joining us now with their reaction to these stories and more, this evening's political panel. We're joined by Bloomberg Politics contributor and Democratic analyst Jeannie Shanzano, democracy visiting fellow at Harvard's Kennedy School's Ash Center, and Republican strategist Matt Terrell, managing partner at Firehouse Strategies. It's great to have both of you with us here, and I want to just get back to the issue of health care. Jeannie, the President of the United States today decided to delay the plan, or at least the administration did, those who were working on a plan to extend Obamacare subsidies and, well, I guess avoid a government shutdown once again in a couple of months. They've decided to put this off without rescheduling. Is health care going to be the new infrastructure week in the second term?
Oh, gosh, I really hope not. But, you know, it may be. And the reality is that the White House seems to have fumbled this politically. You know, you put out that you are going to have this plan, and by all accounts, you don't have enough interaction with, you don't have enough buy-in from Republicans in Congress who have for 15 years been voting to repeal the Obamacare Act. Now, all of a sudden, they are being asked to extend the subsidies. And so that is going to take a lot of political maneuvering. And I don't think the White House understood or prepared for that. And so they said they're going to do it. Now they've delayed it, as you mentioned, indefinitely. And I don't see how they get it done before the end of the year, which is devastating for people who are depending on health care through the exchanges.
And that cuts both ways, potentially for Democrats and Republicans. Matt, thank you for being part of our conversation. It's good to have you here at the desk. I spoke with Chuck Fleischman today, the Republican from Tennessee, who said this shutdown actually made the wait for an Obamacare fix even worse. Let's listen to what he said.
Democrats hurt themselves on a tangible issue that was outside the appropriation process. If they'd have continued to negotiate with our speaker, with Republicans, you would have found a lot of Republicans coming to the table to talk about that issue, but in its proper lane, outside the appropriation process, where it's always been.
Do we believe that, Matt? Because the speaker still hasn't even promised a vote up or down on a deal to extend subsidies.
Well, I think many Republicans agree that if this shutdown never happened, you would have had bipartisan work here, potentially extending these subsidies, whether it's temporarily or whatever form it takes shape. Here's what we do know. We know that affordability is top of mind among Americans right now. And for Republicans right now, their concerns with extending these subsidies is the cost, that the U.S. cannot afford to do it. Take the CBO that just came out recently and said that extending these subsidies, these enhanced ACA subsidies, over the next 10 years would cost over $300 billion. But the other side of this is affordability to Americans. You know, Americans right now are struggling to afford prescription drugs, struggling to afford health care right now. So, look, I think where Republicans are at right now and where President Trump is at right now is doing nothing is not a solution. At the end of the day, you have to offer something. That's why I think the White House is pushing forward with coming out with the plan. Now, the White House has done a number of things over this second term here under President Trump to reduce the cost of prescription drugs. You think about favored nation and you know, supply chain. But at the end of the day, it does come down to affordability for Americans, whether it's housing or health care. That's what matters as be the driving issue come up in the upcoming elections in 2026. A lot of people are seeing premiums double or quadruple in this case without a legislative fix. Ask Marjorie Taylor Greene all about it. There are Republicans who are getting nervous about this, too. Republicans are nervous. And look, I think lawmakers on both sides of the political aisle are hearing from their constituents back home. Healthcare costs are out of control. The United States spends more money on healthcare than any other country on the planet. Now, the question is, how are you going to solve this? A lot of Republicans have been concerned since day one on all this that it is not affordable to extend these enhanced ACA subsidies. They'll tell you this was done through COVID. It's a COVID-era subsidy. Shouldn't be enhanced. But the question is going to be, do you do a temporary enhancement? Is it going to be an and, not or approach by the White House? Maybe it will be temporary extension here of these subsidies. It could be some reforms, such as on, pricing caps, if you or income caps for Americans. Let's see what happens here. But here's what we do know. This is a major issue for voters nationwide, for Americans nationwide.
Yeah, well, and that was the reporting, Jeannie, a 2-year extension with limitations on eligibility. Marjorie Taylor Greene's not waiting around to find out. And I'm just curious your thoughts on her decision here. Is this about her own political career to throw down a marker and maybe run for governor in Georgia? Or will she be the first of other, maybe many Republicans who push back on the administration over this?
I don't think we know yet, but there was some really interesting reporting out of Punchbowl this morning talking about the fact that while some Republicans may not agree with her on some of the particulars, that they do agree that this has been disastrous in terms of owning all of Washington, D.C., and not able to do things for their constituents that they wanted to do, their relationships with the White House. And I think our discussions right now about health care are a crucial part of that. They don't feel like they have gotten the respect and the ability to move forward important issues for their constituents, affordability top among them, through leadership or through the White House. And so you can see this, for instance, in Mike Johnson being very frustrated about discharge petitions coming forward. That's not common. It's a sign of weak leadership. So I think she may be the tip of the iceberg. We could see a scenario in which, I don't think it will happen, but in which they are threatened by the loss of the House during this term. So this is an uncomfortable time. And I think she is indicative of a sense that the midterms are not shaping up well now, early as it is, for Republicans, unless they get their heads around things like health care and affordability, and they're able to show Americans that under them, they are able to do the work of the American public.
How are you reading into this, Matt? President Trump called Marjorie Taylor Greene a traitor. We've had some brutal posts about her, but then just told NBC News over the weekend it's not going to be easy for her to revive her career in politics, though I'd love to see that. What's behind the resignation? What's next for her?
Well, that's up to her. But here's what I can tell you. It's not.
So it's good riddance for you as a Republican.
Well, here's why I think we Republicans realize that this is the Trump party right now. Mm-hmm. You know, the truth is he's the standard bearer. And to be honest, you know, she was able to have a very successful career in politics. Part of that, frankly, was the success that President Trump had. You know, she rode President Trump's coattails in many ways. But here's the truth. You know, Marjorie Taylor Greene's going to decide what she does with her future. But, you know, when you lose President Trump's endorsement, or if he refuses to endorse you for higher office, that's a problem for you. Mm-hmm. You know, whether it's in a primary in Georgia, Wisconsin, New York, or California, if you're in a Republican primary, you need the Trump endorsement. It's vital. He is the person at the end of the day that the MAGA movement is in lockstep with. And there's a lot of talk about, you know, rumblings in the MAGA movement. Mm-hmm. In order to be a leader, you have to have followers. Mm-hmm. And right now, I don't think Marjorie Taylor Greene has a whole lot of followers in the MAGA movement. President Trump does. He's the standard bearer. He's the person, the leader. He's the founder of the MAGA movement. The Republican base will be in lockstep with him. Let's see what happens with her career.
I'd love to see that, he said, Jeannie, to revive her career in politics. Are you counting out Marjorie Taylor Greene?
Oh, I won't count her out, you know, whether she's in politics or maybe, Joe, she joins social media, has her own little deal going forward. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene will be around, and she does speak for a number of people who are frustrated with Washington. She is a populist at heart.
At least you didn't say she's going to join the Democratic Party, because I think that's a bridge too far. I heard a lot of stuff over the weekend. Jeannie Shanzano, Matt Terrell, thank you so much for a great conversation and for being part of our panel this evening. It's still only Monday, and we encourage you to check out the Washington Edition newsletter. You can find it on the terminal and online. I do hope you've got a short week ahead here as we crawl up on Thanksgiving together. And thank you for joining us on Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. We'll see you back here tomorrow on Bloomberg TV and Radio.